Hi, everybody. We're here again tonight with Mark Collingsworth of Vere Global Financial, an expert in finances and in the Wall Street market, what's going on there. But Mark, tonight I'd like to start off with this move by, I guess, Congress to instill new ethics rules for the Federal Reserve. Now, what's that all about?
Well, it appears that Federal Reserve members were actually trading their personal accounts on moves they knew that the moves that the Federal Reserve would make that would be market moving moves, and they were trading on that ahead of time. It's called front running. There's actually a term on Wall Street. The SEC has it called front running. If you or I did that on Wall Street, we'd be prosecuted for front running and spend some time in prison and actually go to jail for it.
Isn't that the same as insider trading?
It's not the same. It is insider trading is when, well, you could classify that, but in this case, it's because you move the market. The insider trading has to do with specific stocks. Now, Nancy Pelosi, if you probably didn't know, is actually the world's greatest stock picker.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that's insider trading.
Examples of that are what with Pelosi?
Let's see. She what was it? She bought into, I think it was what was it, Microsoft, right before they landed a big military or a big government contract to use the office suites, Word, all that kind of stuff. She bought that just a few weeks before it was announced. There was another contract that Amazon won. She bought a huge position in Amazon right before that was announced. And it just goes on and on to such a degree. Now there's actually Twitter feeds out there that actually are like Nancy Pelosi's portfolio, and they keep it up to date whenever she buys or sells stocks.
Not that she would have any inside trader information ahead of time, just because she is the leader of the House.
Correct. It is kind of suspicious, isn't it? And of course, if you ask her, her response is, well, her husband does the investing. She really doesn't know anything about it until she actually has to file the reports with Congress. But even then, it's awful suspicious that he just knows how to buy those stocks weeks before a contract is garnered.
It's akin to Joe Biden not knowing anything about his son Hunter's business dealings,
or who's buying these paintings. Did you know with Hunter Biden? I guess we're getting off subject here. Did you know before Biden became president of the United States, when he was like when Trump was in office and he was a nobody? Did you know that Hunter Biden actually tried to go and have his paintings sold in galleries, and the galleries are like, nobody knows who you are. Go away, leave us alone, wouldn't even showcase them, couldn't even get someone to pay $10 for them. Then boom, this year now he's selling them for $500,000 a piece.
Now, could he say with some legitimacy that it is because of his famous name, and it goes no further than that? It's not like people are laundering money to him or giving him payoffs for his father's influence. Could it be just because he is a famous name? Does that wash?
Well, if it was a famous name, then why didn't the galleries want to show his paintings and try to sell them before his father became president?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying, because he's his father is president now, so it's a more famous name.
Well, it goes beyond the name. Politics are very corrupt. You can't tell me that someone's paying $500,000 for one of his paintings because they think he's the next Picasso. They're paying him to get a meeting with the father. Now, is the payoff to basically try to get something done? I don't know if that's the case, but I'm pretty sure it's at least the opportunity to get a private one-on-one meeting.
You could buy a Picasso for less than a Rembrandt.
Yeah, and pretty soon you'll buy a Rembrandt less than a Biden picture.
Yeah. Anyway, getting back to our main topic tonight.
Yeah.
So the Fed is going to be reformed. So they're no longer be allowed to have, I call it insider trading. What did you say the term was it for?
Front running.
Front running. Okay, now is that actually going to be effective, or is this just more smoke and mirrors?
Well, I'm in an enlightened mood this evening, Larry. It's not going to do anything. All it did was, we got caught. Oh boy, we need to be a lot more careful on all the stuff we do in the future. That's really all it comes down to. Give you a quick little tidbit of history. The Federal Reserve System that we have now, or the central bank we have now, is actually the third central bank that we have in existence. Right. The first two central banks that we have were actually shut down because of all of the corruption and thievery that was going on inside of them. So I kind of look at it, nothing's really changed in the last 200 years. The Federal Reserve is still the Federal Reserve, still doing corruption, thievery, dishonest tactics. It's just a different year, but the same tune.
Actually, Mark, even if they put these ethics rules in place, is there really any way of checking on violations with Federal Reserve members?
Not really. They can put it in what they call a blind trust. And blind trust are just really another way of saying, oh, I've given somebody else the authority to buy and sell. Well, yes, that may be true, but unfortunately, you're the person telling that person now what to buy and sell.
Explain to the layman how this scam works, how they're able to do buying and selling at the proper time at good profit for themselves by the information they have by being on the Federal Reserve.
Well, let's say several things. Let's say that you know that you're going to, before the announcement, let's say back here like last year, in March of last year, you knew the Federal Reserve was going to go in and actually start buying up a bunch of bonds. And of course, those bonds, as you buy the bonds, the yields on them drop and the price goes up. So you've locked in the higher yield and you got capital gains on it. One of the issues they actually had is the Federal Reserve actually had a list of what bonds they were going to buy. Like, they had Ford Motor Company. There was, I think at one time they were going to buy the Hertz bonds and stuff like that. The Federal Reserve members, before it became public what bonds the Federal Reserve was going to sink billions of dollars into, the Federal Reserve went and bought those exact same bonds for their personal accounts. So essentially what they did is they bought bonds that were yielding 6-7% bond yields, and then the government comes in and starts buying them up, driving the yield down and the price up. So they had a high yield off of it, and they actually got a capital gains off of it.
So, this is so outrageous. I mean, how could this be allowed?
It's just basically the people that write the laws basically use the laws any way they want to. There's no oversight committee. I mean, for the last, I remember going all the way back to going back to the 70s. They've tried to audit the Federal Reserve because even the United States government does not know what goes on inside the Federal Reserve. I'm sure you've heard about, Rand Paul has argued many times that the Fed's financials need to be audited every year, but the Federal Reserve comes back and says, it's very important that we make sure we keep the government separate from the policies that drive the economy. I don't see why you can't go in there and look at the books.
Now, you've explained in the past that actually it's illegal to know even who owns the Federal Reserve, who has stock in it, et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct?
That is correct. The Federal Reserve, when the Federal Reserve Act that was written in 1912, I believe, that the paperwork or the actual paper, the act that got passed in Congress, it actually states in there that the owners of the stock in the company cannot be, their names cannot be revealed. The stock also pays a 6% dividend yield, by the way. So, I mean, what is that thing now? 6% on what? $8 trillion. That's a nice dividend check, No one knows what it is. And it's a secret. Now, you can speculate on probably who owns the stock in it. The meeting that they drew up on Jekyll Island, which was J.P. Morgan's private house. Jekyll Island's actually back in the early 1900s was a very high-end resort for the richest people in the world to have their summer homes at. They went there. It was J.P. Morgan. There were some representatives from the Warburg Pincus. They were representatives of the Rothschild family. The Rockefellers had representatives there. A lot of people don't realize. People think the Rockefellers actually made money from the oil industry. That's partly true. Of course, the Rockefellers are what basically the modern day Rockefeller oil company. 100 years ago, it was known as Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, Phillips, and Texaco. But the Rockefellers actually were the founders of Chase Manhattan Bank.
Now, it's so you're saying there's no way that their stock buys could even be traced. I thought stocks purchases, there had to be a public record of that.
There is, and you're actually supposed to file a form out and submit that. But the problem here is there's nobody overseeing the Federal Reserve to make sure those forms are actually filled out and actually submitted.
Wow, pretty
The,
neat.
the Federal Reserve is its own self-regulatory body. You look kind of like, my industry, the SEC and FINRA and other state regulatory bodies oversee me on, a daily basis on what I'm doing. If I do something wrong, there's 3 different entities there that can catch it and say, hey, Mark, you're not supposed to be doing this. The Federal Reserve is its own regulatory body. There's nobody over it to regulate it.
It's so actually they could control the stock market. They could control the economy and profit personally by doing that.
Correct. If they knew that they were going to make a statement and say they're going to, start, cutting interest rates or something, when you cut interest rates, the stock market usually has a big bump up.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that information ahead of time, you can go in and buy, call options on the S&P, buy S&P futures. It would be very easy for a very small amount of money using leverage, knowing the events of what the Federal Reserve is going to say ahead of time, to turn a few $1,000s into tens of thousands of dollars within a matter of seconds.
So, Mark, what you're saying is these new ethic rules are really going to amount to nothing, and the game will continue as is.
Well, correct, because you write all these rules. Okay, so think about who's in charge of the Federal Reserve. It's the Jeremy Powell, right? He's going to write a bunch of rules down on a piece of paper. I mean, he's even been found trading his own personal stocks. So he's in charge of enforcing these ethic rules. Well, he's the guy that's in charge of enforcing them, but he's also the one doing it. So it's kind of like, like Al Capone. You give Al Capone the ability to regulate the whiskey industry in the 1930s. I mean, it makes no sense.
Actually, didn't Powell himself call for reform earlier this summer? Was that just lip service to get ahead of the game?
That was just lip service. They basically got caught, and they're trying their best to sugarcoat it and try to make it look like they're actually trying to do something. But nothing's going to change there, because again, there's the people that are enforcing the laws are the exact same people that are breaking the laws.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the viewers writing in now is asking, why do we have such a system? Isn't it in the Constitution that Congress should coin money?
That is correct. The paper that you have in your wallet that says Federal Reserve note on it, under the Constitution, that is an illegal currency. The only currency that's legal in the United States under the Constitution is the form of coins. And the way the government got around that so they could print unlimited amounts of money, because if your money is in coins, or let's say gold or silver, there's a limited supply of gold or silver, meaning that you can only print or mint a limited amount of money in coins. The reason why that's like that is your debt levels are automatically capped. We wouldn't have a $30 trillion in debt if our official currency was that in coinage. So you create the Federal Reserve, which is not a government entity, which falls outside the bounds of the Constitution, and now you can do whatever you want to.
There's another question coming in. Why doesn't Congress squawk about this? Nobody's speaking out. How come?
There's actually been several people. I know Elizabeth Warren has talked about it. Even though she's a Democrat, she is absolutely correct that the Federal Reserve has too much power, and there's nobody in the Federal Reserve there's no checks and balances. Rand Paul, both him and his father, have both argued that the Federal Reserve needs to be regulated, needs to be audited, and so forth. And just since we're really on the subject here real fast, I have to mention Fort Knox really quick. Back in the 1970s, Congress was arguing, was pounding the table about wanting to have an audit of Fort Knox to make sure all this gold that was confiscated during the Great Depression actually was there at Fort Knox. Well, they actually finally got approval to actually go to Fort Knox and actually do an actual audit to make sure the gold was there. So the guys that are there at Fort Knox, there's 12 vaults in Fort Knox. The guards escort the auditors to the vault they pick out. The security guards then go into the vault and pick the gold bar of their choosing and bring out, and the entire audit in the 1970s was based on that one vault and that one brick of gold that was picked by the people at Fort Knox and not by the auditors.
Why was that invalid?
Well, if let's say all the gold there at Fort Knox doesn't exist except for that one brick of gold, if you go in there and do an audit, you pick that one brick of gold. You say there's $1 trillion worth of gold there, but if there's only one brick of gold there worth $1,000, and say, well, hey, that brick of gold's worth $1,000. Multiply that times 100 million bricks, which is what we have here. You now have X amount of money.
But the auditors choose the vault and the bricks at random, correct?
In an audit, when I go through an audit on my stuff, the auditors pick what they want to look at. In this case, with Fort Knox, it was the Fort Knox security administrators that actually picked the vault and picked the brick of gold.
Oh, all right. So the auditors had no say over it. They were presented with a vault and bar of the selection of others. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
All right. Getting on another topic now, there's also been talk with the Biden administration of taxing capital gains before they're sold. Now, what's that all about, and how will that affect people like you and me and the average person?
Well, there's multiple problems with that, and I guess the biggest problem is, of course, there's some people, some of your liberals are probably really, jumping up and down, going, "That's a great thing." But I have to remind people that the original income tax that was put together in 1913, it was a 7% tax for people making $100,000 or more. Back in 1913, $100,000 was equivalent, I think, of like $2.2 million in a day's term. So that was your ultra rich. Well, once the Congress got a taste of this income tax in the mid 1900s, they was like, "Hey, great, we need to make this available to everybody, do it to everybody." And that's how everybody started paying income taxes, because the original law they put in place, it's very hard to pass laws, but once laws are passed, it's very easy to make amendments and change them internally. So where I'm going at with that, go ahead, you have a question.
Well, I was going to say, for the layman, explain basically what a capital gain is and how it is currently taxed and how it would be taxed under this new rule.
Okay. So let's say you buy a stock at $100 and it goes up to, let's say, $200. So you've made $100 profit. You bought it at 100 and it goes to 200. You don't pay any taxes on it whatsoever until you actually sell it. Under this scenario, you buy a stock at 100 and it goes to $200, you're going to be taxed on that additional $100 that you actually made. Now, where the problem comes in at, what if a stock market crash happens or something, and that stock falls from $200, which you paid income taxes on at 200, it falls all the way back down to $50 a share. Is the government now going to write out this massive check to these billionaires? I mean, Jeff Bezos, $60 billion in Amazon stock. If it takes a 50% hit, is the government going to write him out a check for $30 billion?
Yeah, but will he actually end up paying that new capital gains tax? Or is he going to find a way around it?
Oh, no, I'm not even a lawyer, and just sitting back, just thinking about it, I can already think of a half a dozen ways that you could probably bypass this. One way is you could simply move your money offshore, put it in an offshore bank account where the government cannot keep track of the assets. Put it in real estate. Real estate's actually exempt from this tax. It's supposed to be only liquid assets like stocks. So put your money in real estate. You don't get taxed on that. Go out and buy some Picassos and put it in your basement. Government won't know about that. Or even better yet, put it in a charitable trust or something, and you get this huge tax write-off, but you still collect all the income off of it against that investment.
So again, it's going to hit the little people who don't have all those mechanisms and dodges available to them. The big guys, the billionaires and multimillionaires, are going to find ways around it, but ordinary people who have a little money with a capital gain is the ones that are going to be hit.
In the long run, yes, because I believe the government will eventually take that and want to tax IRAs and so forth, because they're going to get addicted to the amount of money. The government's in desperate need of money with all of the debt that they have run up. But the more important thing on the little people is the billionaires, the tax they pay, they won't pay it for the simple reason they'll simply go out and raise the cost of their goods and services to pay for those taxes. So if you're buying XYZ from Amazon, Jeff Bezos will just simply raise the cost of that product by 10, 15% inflation. And so the little guy is going to be hit on a double side whammy.
If this does pass, how will it affect the economy and the stock market?
I don't think it'll affect the stock market that much. I think what it'll affect more is that the companies will start to shut down operations. Like, let's say you own $100 million of Amazon stock. move it outside the United States, sell it in a trust or something, put it in a charity. There's so many different ways they can get around this. But in the end result, the reason why we have the economy that we have today is because capital has freely flowed into the capital market system. By putting this tax on it, that's going to force money out of the capital system. And what that eventually ends up meaning is that people are going to lose their jobs and see higher inflation as that extra capital comes out of the country, going into hidden spots where it does not create jobs and so forth.
And speaking more generally of the trend with inflation, where do you see it going? How high? How soon?
I don't think we really have an inflation problem right now. We really have a logistics problem. So by that, I mean, if you go, a lot of our goods come from Asia, which is just naturally cheaper goods. A lot of factories and plants in China and Asia have been shut down because of COVID. So they're not producing those same goods and services. Second point is off the coastline of California, there's about 100 cargo ships loaded with goods from Asia, which are of course cheaper, and they can't unload those goods for a multitude of reasons. It used to take about 3 days to unload the cargo ship and load a truck and have it shipped off to point A or B. Today, it takes over 10 days to offload it and reload it, and there's not a lot of truck drivers. A lot of truck drivers have left the industry because they don't want to sit there for 10 days not getting paid. So the cheaper goods that the United States is used to getting are not flowing into the economy. That's one point. Second point is the United States government is not allowing oil companies to drill as aggressively as they used to under Donald Trump, which is forcing oil prices to go through the roof, which is another form of higher prices. But that's not inflationary either. That problem can be fixed through pumping more oil. And the thing with logistics, as soon as those ships get unloaded, prices should fall. But the point where you do see inflation is the government is basically has paid people not to go back to work with all these extended and higher unemployment benefits. Because those people don't want to go back to work, but companies are in desperate need of employees to do jobs, companies now are starting to raise wages to make people want to come back to work. Higher wages is inflationary. So the moral of the story is if we can't get the logistics problem under control and we can't get the oil prices down soon enough, that's going to cause inflation because you'll see an increase in wages. Wages cannot be reversed as easily as oil prices, cargo.
So actually, inflation is here, but there's separate components in it. Some are traditional, such as workers' wages being raised. Others have to do more with supply chain problems, et cetera, et cetera. So the end result is inflation, but what you're saying is not all of it is from traditional situations.
Correct. Believe it or not, the bulk of the inflation you're seeing right now really comes down to a mismanagement in government leadership.
So do you see any end in sight?
Not until somebody, either the people running the government are going to have a wake-up call and realize they're running things in the ground. And that's one of the problems I've always had with politicians. Politicians have never really worked in the real world, so they really don't know how the most basic elements of the economy work. I'll give you an example on this with all this logistics problems that we have in California. I spent some time in the Army in logistics. Going back to World War II in Normandy, did you know that at the Normandy invasion, the Allied forces bought a fully functional port system to unload all those tanks and everything on the beaches of France in less than 48 hours? If I was president, I would simply get the Army Corps of Engineers and the Army's transportation system. The Army has a huge transportation and logistics division. If you're going to fight a war, you got to be able to move stuff from point A to point B. Bring those guys out to California, spend $1 billion to build a makeshift port system, and have those Army transportation trucks just running 24-hour operations.
Now, wouldn't the unions be running interference on that?
And that's part of the problem right now with the unloading. Like Florida right now runs a very efficient port system. It's one of probably the best run port systems in the world. They have no backlog right now. The ships come in, they get unloaded within less than 2 days. No ships are sitting off the coast of Florida. Florida's governor has begged the California governor to send the ships to Florida so they can start getting the cargo unloaded because we got Christmas coming up. So on a side note, if you're going to go do your Christmas shopping, start doing it now, because what you might want might be sitting off the coast of California. California is refusing to do it. Why? Because the unions want to unload those ships so they can get their workers paid. Because if you're paying union dues, you want to have a job. And because of government red tape, 100 cargo ships are sitting off the coast of California when that problem could be fixed by just sending them to Florida.
Yeah, and of course, the unions are a strong influence on the Biden administration.
Yep.
One technical point here. Can those huge cargo ships get through the Panama Canal to get to the East Coast?
No, they cannot. Cargo ships today are way, way too big to go through the Panama Canal. So it would take you roughly 3 weeks to go from Florida, to go from California around the tip of South America to get to Florida. But here's the rub also. You got ships right now sitting off the coast of California that have sat there for 7 weeks and still don't even have a slot yet on when they'll be unloaded.
So even though going around the tip of South America and then up to Florida would increase the transportation costs, considering the alternative, it'd be well worth it.
Correct. You're looking at 3 weeks versus sitting there now for 7 weeks. I mean, who knows? The ships that are sitting off the coast of California, it's 7 weeks right now. Next week, it could turn into 8. You know, I was looking at, I keep track of this every Friday. If you go back to the summer, there was only 44 ships off the coast of California, and it was only taking 6 days to unload one. Now jump from the summer to present. Now we have 111 cargo ships off the coast of California, and it's now taking over 10 days to unload one.
Well, you know, that also calls to mind part of the basic problem with today's economy and how our industrial base has been gutted, outsourced to China. So all those ships sitting off the California coast are coming from China.
Correct, with Chinese goods. And that's another problem. All these ships are now starting to be backlogged up against California. No telling when they're going to be able to get to return back to Asia. So all these cargo ships are sitting there. Once you get them unloaded, you're still looking at basically another 2 weeks to 3 weeks to send them from California back to Asia, taking 4 or 5 days to reload them in Asia, then another 3 weeks to send them back to California again. So you're looking at over a month for round trip on this stuff to get loaded and unloaded.
So just wrapping up, Mark, so all this mess that we've described is not easily solved or anytime soon.
No, unfortunately, the way the government's currently run, this is a problem that could be easily fixed. If I was president, I would get the Army Logistics Division to fix the problems in California, and I would also sign an executive order telling oil companies like Exxon and Chevron to start pumping as much oil as they can. But we have unions affect us in California, and we have people who are the green climate people who don't think we should be pumping oil and contributing to climate crisis.
Yeah, so we're getting oil abroad anyway. We're still burning it here and polluting.
Oh yeah, that's also another thing. I don't know why they blame the United States for all this pollution and everything. China produces 3 times more pollution than we do. They have no regulations whatsoever. And then you're saying the United States is going to lead the charge on climate change. Well, that's great and dandy, but nobody else is doing anything. And why should they?
Mark Collingsworth of Vere Global Financial. Thanks once again for being with us, Mark. Thank you.
Anytime.